According to a ruling by the North Gauteng High Court, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa's recognition of King Zulu Coronation in accordance with the Leadership Act is void and illegal. However, the ruling does not state the decision is not about who ought to be the AmaZulu king. Meanwhile, two questions were posed to the court, and first is if King Zulu chosen in accordance with Zulu custom, and second was the president's right to recognize the king in accordance with the Leadership Act. Prince Timakade and Mbonisi Zulu, a half-brother of late King Godwill Zwelithini, launched the application to have President Cyril Ramaphosa's recognition of Mr. Zulu as rightful monarch set aside. Simikade also wanted a meeting convened by the late Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi, where Mr. Zulu was identified as heir to the throne, be set aside and reviewed, as well as his ensuing coronation. The king was certified by South African government in October last year. And to talk about this, I'm being joined live on the news by legal analyst Mpumelelo Zikalala. Good morning from here. Glad to have you join me.
Good morning to you, and also good morning to your viewers.
Okay, now, what more can you tell us about the court setting aside the recognition of AmaZulu king?
Basically, the court highlighted a few things yesterday. The first one was to say the court is not there to decide who the next king should be, and that's not certainly the questions which were posed to the court. Secondly, was to say, Mr. President, there is a complaint that was laid at your table, and you haven't attended to that particular complaint. Now start activities or start an initiative of making sure that you're able to attend to those. And how do you do that? You follow the provisions which are applicable as per the Traditional Leadership and Courts Act, which determines how these sort of disputes are investigated, and form an investigation committee. And from that particular committee, the results will be recommended to you. Either will come back and say the decision that you've taken earlier in recognizing the Zulu is the correct one, or they will come back and say this is the correct individual that ought to be recognized. Mr. President, can you please do the right thing and make sure that you issue a recognition certificate to them?
But Mpumelelo, do you think the president, acted out of his jurisdiction, considering how the monarch is being run over, in the course of the years?
No, not at all. There are two things that should be mentioned in this particular case. The first one is to say, firstly, a king is not elected, however a king is born. And then a king is appointed as per the customary rules and procedures and practices which are then applicable to that particular tribe. Now, in this case, the Zulu monarch is the one that chooses or determines how those particular processes ought to be. The only thing that the president does is, and in line with the provisions of what they actually said, simply recognizes that particular individual upon the recommendation of the family of the royal family. So the president was quite correct in saying that, well, the matter has gone to court. There's a judgment by Madondo, which was heard in the Pietermaritzburg High Court, that says everything has gone okay. There's nothing wrong with it. So the president was correct to rely on that particular one. And the judgment was quite clear yesterday in terms of saying the judgment by Madondo still stands. It was just peculiar as to if the judgment by Madondo stands, why then do you come to a different conclusion? They want to cause an investigation to be undertaken that will lead to a different result if you understand and respect that particular judgment as it is. So it's certainly one of the judgments issued yesterday in which I think the president and even the ECL ought to take on appeal and say to the SCA, can you please check whether this particular judgment was taken in a proper manner? You have certain confession or admissions that have been made, and yet the results of or the outcome of the particular judgment is not in line with what it ought to be in the first place.
What do you think is the distinction between the monarch and the role of the government in the appointment of the king, taking the example from how the UK structured their own?
Now, the monarch has its own rules and procedures as to how a king is appointed. And then from the side of government is simply the recognition of the monarch that has been appointed by that particular family. So the South African Constitution is very clear in terms of that recognition. So what they don't do is to say who's supposed to be king and who's not supposed to be king. The only thing that they do is to recognize whoever has been recommended upon them and then offer financial support. Of course, the financial support is to further the interest of the particular nation and for community development as a whole. So in this case, it's simply a process of saying, what does the law say? In this case, I think the president was quite correct in terms of saying this is the individual, the name that was submitted to me. If you have a problem with it, then you must go to court on your own and try to set it aside. However, for me, I'm going to recognize this particular individual as is the name that has been laid in front of me. Any other disputes that are there, I simply relied on what the judge has said, Judge Madondo, and Judge Madondo was saying everything is okay. So on that basis, in which I then issued the recognition certificate.
So what's the way forward from here legally for the king?
Well, he can take the matter on appeal to the Supreme Court of Appeals. If he then fails there, he can still go to the Constitutional Court. He will call there and say, can you please determine whether this particular judgment was taken correctly? If someone who in the same wavelength, in the same powers in the court that granted me, or indirectly he said that I was the correct individual to be named the CEO, can you please look into that? And then the SAA might come to a different conclusion. So there's still room to appeal this particular judgment which was issued yesterday to even end at the Constitutional Court before a final decision of the matter has been taken. The other situation would be, by the way, which is much more recommendable, the mediation process between the two parties that are there. At the end of the day, it does not serve any interest to have a king which is going to be appointed by any court, because their allegiance of the individuals, of the people that they're supposed to lead, is supposed to be given or received on a natural basis. So the only way in which the Zulu nation can be preserved and the growth of the Zulu nation can be secured is if these two factions sit down and say what is in the best interest of all of us. Let's do that so that we're able to say this is not the nation that fell apart within our period or in our hands.
All right, thank you so much for your time on the news. Mpumelelo, Zikalala. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for hosting.